Hi, everybody. My name is Lee Wind. I'm the Chief Content Officer for the Independent Book Publishers Association, and you've arrived at our free IBPA PubU online webinar, First Nations, Indigenous, and Community-Driven Publishing. We have two Indigenous publishers with us today, Wiley Barnes and Cecelia LaPointe. The hope is that this is a resource and a great discussion. And so I think that probably a good way to start would be to have Wiley and Cecelia introduce yourselves and your publishing programs, and let's start the conversation. Wiley, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Lee. Chukma, Sohochafo at Wiley Barnes. My name is Wiley Barnes, Chickasaw. I'm honored. I serve as Director of Chickasaw Press for the past 12 years now. Chickasaw Press is an independent publisher owned and operated by the Chickasaw Nation, and we're located in Ada, Oklahoma. We publish books. We publish a magazine that comes out twice a year. We also publish an academic journal, and we produce some other media like videos, photography. We've even done some app development, and we also, really since COVID, we've been doing some short-run documentaries as well. So Chickasaw Press is the first tribal press of its kind. We publish books about Chickasaw history, language, and culture. And it was established in 2006 by the governor of the Chickasaw Nation, Governor Bill Anatobi. He basically saw a need for us to own our own history and tell it from our own perspective. And so this knowledge is critical to the preservation and continuance of a shared Chickasaw cultural identity, particularly as our out of bounds and our territory, our inbounds population increases. So citizenship, Chickasaw citizenship is actually increasing both within and outside of our boundaries. And so our area of publishing is growing each year like our population. And so we've published since 2006 about 70 titles, and we are still doing more and more every year. We're doing new research, new information is being uncovered, new books are being published, papers are being presented, and more stories are told from a Chickasaw perspective. So that's kind of an important point I want to make, that this is active. This is not telling the past either. So this is a living culture that is alive and doing well. So that kind of gives us the quick rundown. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Cecelia.
All right. Bonjour, Nigagan Spapi, Indigenous Cause, Ajijaak Jadam, Chwikwadong, Mashki ZB in Dojaba. And I said, my name is Little Laughing Otter. I'm Crane Clan. I come from the Keweenaw Bay Indian community in the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe, and I live in Michigan. I say the entire state of Michigan because all of the state to me is home, and I love it here. And Michigan actually means big and cut out of cloth, or big water, and hence we have the wonderful Great Lakes, which make it very wonderful. So I'm the founder and executive director of Waub Ajijaak Press and Foundation. And the press is named after an ancestral and hereditary chief in my family's lineage, coming from Moning-Wanakaning Minis, otherwise known as Madeline Island, Wisconsin. So if you were to look up Madeline Island, Wisconsin, you would see that there's a village of LaPointe. And so, it's quite honorable to be able to carry on the legacy and the name and the work. And so Waub Ajijaak Press, we're a nonprofit publisher, and we support the Native American community through scholarships and philanthropy. Our focus is on Michigan, the Great Lakes, the Midwest, and the Anishinaabe Nation. And with our press, I actually completed a business merger last year, and we were able to update our press and transition from paperback to hardcover. So we have 4 children's books. 3 of those children's books are 100% bilingual in Ojibwe and English. And one is English with an Ojibwe glossary that we just published this year. And we also have a coloring book. And so we are focused on the bilingual education. We're looking into some other avenues right now. It's really exciting because, the circulation of our books is primarily within the Midwest and Great Lakes. But, with the growth, we're just excited to see what happens next.
Cool. So I wanted to pop in with a quick question. Cecelia, that sounds like, are you doing your own printing?
Nope, we had formerly used an on-demand printing company that was out of state, but we do use one specifically in Michigan.
So are you holding inventory yourselves, and are you doing sales yourselves?
Yes, we do it all.
That's amazing. And Wiley, I believe you have your own sales team and your own warehouses and stuff as well, right?
Yes, we've done our own distribution and wholesale up until August of 24, and then we have turned over our distribution, but we still do wholesale. We have two warehouses. We warehouse, we manage our own inventory. We also have a brick and mortar bookstore here in our town that we run. And then we obviously we do our own direct to consumer on chickasawpress.com, and then utilize all those other outlets that we kind of have to use. So, but yeah, we kind of got to a point with doing our own distribution that we weren't going to be able to grow anymore unless we partnered with someone. So, but yes, so since I've been 12 years, pretty much we've been doing our own warehousing and our own distribution, which Cecelia and I have talked over the last few months, presents its own benefits and its own challenges. But it in our mind, to me, early on, it was the right thing to do because you have a little more control. So.
Cecilia, is there anything you wanted to add about how you figured out the logistics of, once you have the books, getting them out into the hands of the readers for whom they'll mean so much?
Yes, in the beginning, it was really a small business I had on the side. So it was founded in 2015, and it was more of that. I was really passionate about getting children's books out there. And it started with the story Ajijaak Crane. We did a fundraiser, and we had support from a few tribal communities in Michigan, the Keweenaw Bay Indian community and Saginaw Chippewa tribe of Michigan. And then we had, I think it was 40 plus individual donors. It was really great and exciting. And once that book started growing, we had published other books, and it was, there aren't a lot of resources out there. And I think when you're doing something on the side, because I had my nonprofit and I had my other small business, it was more of like a community service. Okay, we weren't making a profit. We weren't going to make a profit because, um, that was just what, and there was also little support, So I think that was very disheartening. But the distribution process is kind of there's a learning curve to it, and getting books out there. I wish back, in 2015 that I had a mentor or someone to say, you can do this. And, rather than making more work for yourself when you're looking through all the paperwork and everything you have to do. So, yeah, with distribution, I think it's definitely easier. We're not at the place where we need to, find another company to do this for us, because we have certain bookstores that carry our books, and then we have, customers that kind of spread the word. They know of our books, and people are excited about our books, and we get interesting requests. Um, but I think it's a matter of, like, because we just completed a merger year, we're also in a growth phase, and in getting increased visibility of our books.
definitely want you two to ask each other questions too, but I'll pop in occasionally. Uh, I'm wondering if you could share, you were saying, Cecelia, 10 years ago, you wish you had someone that would have been able to sit you down with a little bit of experience. Now that you have this experience, I'd love to hear from you, and then from Wiley, like what would you like to tell people that are uh, part of Native communities that are thinking about, like, wow, my community could really use a publishing program. We could use bilingual children's books. We could, like, where should we start? I guess that's the idea. So what advice do you have to share with the folks that are watching this recording or attending live, please?
I think it's like any business. You just need to handle the business side of things first. People often have like an idealistic vision or they have something that can go ahead of that. And I think it's getting that down first. Of course, there's always things you can build into a business, different policies and procedures, but I think it's important to get that set. So, for example, if a tribal community, a native nation, they're like, we would like to publish, we have a need for board books, bilingual board books. And they could look into the budget that they have. They could look into starting a business within the community with a lot of the changes in Native communities, with new businesses being all started. Um, I think that's one way to look at it, and one way to approach it. Um, so I think, yeah, there's a lot of possibilities. It's just I know this isn't a priority in terms of like other issues that may need to be addressed and may need to be funded within the community. So that's how I see it. And it'd be great to hear from Wiley on his advice.
Well, publishing is hard. That's my advice. And anybody that tells you otherwise hasn't done it for very long. I would say, yeah, the business is important, but I think we did it a little bit backwards, that we were really focused on our goal and our mission for so many years, and the business came later. Like the business came out of necessity because we're like, okay, we have all these wonderful books. Now what do we do with them? Um, we were more modeled off an academic press, like a university press. So we were more interested in content. Um, and so generating and publishing our own research for us was just an act of taking ownership over our own history. But it was also an exercise of self-determination and cultural sovereignty. So our books enable us to share our history and culture with non-Chickasaws. So like within our state, it was a way that we could enhance our relationships with our neighbors, and create a better understanding and awareness of our Chickasaw history and culture, our self-governance, and our sovereignty. So we kind of our Chickasaw Press is based on our Chickasaw values of community and sharing and education. And so then through our books, we were aiming to revitalize and strengthen our cultural identity, and then also giving an understanding of what it means to be Chickasaw. So early on in 2006 was when Chickasaw Press was established, and our primary focus at that time was, and still to this day, is Chickasaw history and culture. So then in 2013, we saw a need, just like Cecelia was saying about like identifying your community's needs as far as, oh, we want a board book, or we want a book with language. So we had some children's books published under Chickasaw Press, but we saw a need to establish so like an imprint with that sole focus. So we started White Dog Press in 2013, and this imprint's focus was children's books, fiction, and poetry. And we have cookbooks, but basically all the other kind of creative genres would fall under White Dog at that point. And then fast forward almost another 10 years later, again, we just launched our third imprint in 2023 called Leaning Pole Press. And this is a whole new era of publishing for Chickasaw Press, where we're going to expand our catalog into all the other genres. And the goal of Leaning Pole Press is to provide an outlet for Chickasaw authors exclusively and scholars, specifically to create published works that encompass all the other genres and subjects beyond the Chickasaw historical and cultural experience. So, but like, I think it's really important to have good mission statements or goal statements or vision statements that drive your decisions. Because all the decisions we make are centered around the Chickasaw Nation's mission statement, which is to enhance the overall quality life of Chickasaw people. So this is at the heart and the center of all our decisions. And each imprint has its own goal, but then we all basically center around the mission. And for me, it's like in my heart, it's like it's just like the core. That's how we make business decisions. It's how we make decisions on what books to publish, and it makes it very unified and satisfying to make decisions that way. So, and I understand that not everybody's in that position to make those decisions that way, but.
So, Wiley, that made me think of, you have a pretty unique acquisitions process that you've shared with me in the past, that it's a blind process, I believe. And I'm wondering if you could share about how that evolved. And then maybe Cecelia, you could chime in with, how do you look at the acquisitions process for your press?
Sure. So we're an independent publisher that has a traditional publisher. So um, we we have open submissions year round, and then we have a editorial board that reviews our submissions, and they do that actually. We blind review. So there's a committee or there's a board that will review and make the recommendations based on the different goals of each imprint. So we have guidelines that our submissions have to follow, and then we accept, reject, or we also revise and resubmit. When you're niche and you're like needing content, so we do royalties, but we also do work for hire. I do literary purchase agreements, so we buy copyrights. We do kind of all the different things that you need in your tool belt to basically get really good content that fits all the different imprints. But we found the blind review is a very nice way to remove any biases, anybody, as much as we can, because when you're the Chickasaw people, I mean, we are in Oklahoma, and there's times when you might actually know the person that's submitting or things like that. So we really do try to review based on the content of the work and whether it actually contributes to the catalog, whether it contributes to any of the three imprints. So.
Yes, and for our process, because we just completed a business merger, in the past with a lot of my work, just being connected to the community, you would meet someone in terms of translation, or someone would be interested in doing illustrations. And when Waub Ajijaak Press was an LLC, obviously we didn't have the funding to pay the illustrators the way that we can now, because we're a nonprofit and we have a lot of great and wonderful supporters and funders. But we just conducted our first open reading period, and we're just going to be doing that process. Um, it, you know, I, and so we actually didn't, we're moving forward with our process. And the goal is to publish at least one to two new stories each year. The reason why is because we have a process of it's more of a community-based model rather than, I'm from an auto industry family, so the means of production and producing things. So a lot of us have that mindset, and in a way, it's about slowing down. How can work be different? And so that's a part of our model at Waub Ajijaak Press and Foundation. Is it's not about, look, we have 85 titles and we've achieved so much. It's like in 3 years from now, we could have 5 new titles, and those books are having an impact on Anishinaabe language revitalization, cultural connection, youth programs, creating events in communities. It's interesting to see how things get circulated and how our books, where they reach. So, we'll be conducting an open reading period later this year again. And I like that process. We haven't had reviewers. I know there's a lot of different approaches, but because we're small and we just have a few staff, really, we just have a very simple process right now. And that may change in the future. But yeah, I think we also will get like a lot of organizations, and we'll get an email about someone wanting to illustrate for us, or submitting a story outside of the open reading period. And so we have to say no to that, but it's still quite, honorable that there are people interested in looking at our work. So we'll take that as a compliment.
I'm curious about how you're connecting with your communities in a couple of ways. One, you both, so like in terms of like hearing from the communities, from each of your communities, and the in terms of what they would most like to see in terms of what you're publishing, but also in terms of like letting them know what you're up to. Cecelia, it sounds like you're also doing fundraising from the community. Um, so are you using are you doing surveys? Is it more like meeting people at different community events? Can you share a little about that? Cecelia, let's start with you, please, and then Wiley, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yes. With our press, we actually we started this last year. So we have a book donation initiative, and you may have all heard about the deaths of the sandhill crane. Well, Ajijaak is crane in the Anishinaabe language. So in the migration of Ajijaak returning to our homelands, there's been a lot of deaths in places like Indiana. Um, I'm not so sure about Southwest Michigan. That's a big area where they migrate to. So we decided, because we're doing very well financially, that we could donate more books this time around. And with that, it's not just that we're donating our books anywhere. It's specifically to like language immersion schools, language immersion programs, tribal colleges, tribal schools. And believe it or not, in the Anishinaabe Nation, whether you're in the US and Canada, there's so much going on with language revitalization. It could be incredible just to like lay that out, document it, and see the reach, because it's quite incredible. And so that's how we contribute to that is, particularly with the sadness around losing our relative, Ajijaak is very important. It's one of the oldest birds on the planet, and culturally, it's very significant in our communities. So last year with the book donation initiative, we supported a few places, and most of them were immersion programs, but one was a nonprofit in Minnesota. So with that being said, too, we because of our grants and philanthropy work, we have the awareness of our books through our community context there, and that often we've heard things of like, oh, we had an event with Ajijaak, or we'd like to use this book in one of our programs, and that's totally fine. That's wonderful. So it's mainly about like the networks and the community collaborations, and then it seems like there's a lot of what we say here in the Great Lakes is having that ripple effect. So it just goes on, and you don't have control over the ripples, and you don't have, and that's a good thing because we want the reach to continue to have that beautiful ripple effect.
Man, good conversation. I I mean our audience primarily is Chickasaw people, so we obviously are always interested in topics that we or subjects or research that we haven't uncovered or we haven't wrote about. So we do have one in-house author on staff, and he's able to produce a book about every other year with a focus on nonfiction, because for us the nonfiction content is a little harder to curate. Once we started publishing children's books and fiction titles, we found that our submissions kind of went 10 to 1 nonfiction to the fiction and children's. So we have lots of that content, but we also found that, through our children's books, through preserving our language and our history with children's books and fiction, that we're able to reach more Chickasaw citizens. Like we've created interest in our backlist of our nonfiction from those other books as well. But we always are looking at ways to further preserve our Chickasaw history and culture and our language. We also we're in we're kind of in a plan of focusing the next 10 years on Chickasaw language heavily. We typically, all our books, all our children's books for the most part have language in them or a part of them. But the next several years, we're focusing on several books that will highlight, feature, and teach our language. Our fluent speaker population is shrinking considerably, and so and most of that's just because of age. That first generation speakers population is shrinking for us very quickly. And so there's a large effort, even beyond publishing books, to create more speakers. And so we're partnering with our Chickasaw language and our Fluent Speaker Committee to basically help support that effort. And so there's typically we're having like this year we've got a new workbook coming out. We've got lots of heavily Chickasaw language featured books in the plans for every year moving forward for the next 10 years. So.
Wiley, you have things planned out for the next 10 years?
Well, yes, some titles are planned for the next 10 years. I have several series that we know that we have that much that were planned for the next 10 years. I couldn't, we work typically 3 to 5 years in advance as far as titles. And you have to adjust, just like all publishers, what's ready. You're relying on a lot of external forces at play here with working with authors and deadlines and editing and all the things that we deal with, budgets and all that stuff. So
Cecelia, for contrast, how far in advance are you working?
Well, we're working just right now, it's about 18 months. So it's really, I think I love about the organization and where we're at in terms of like a lot of our funders is it's very flexible and supportive. It's not rigid. So it's more of a process. It's kind of like this book needs to happen and it's going to happen now rather than planning for it. So, like we just had a really unique situation. And I think it's an opportunity, that we would like to go with. So, and that's the cool thing about the work, I think, is that it is flexible, and that's what makes us unique. And there's a lot of rigidity in the world. There's enough of that. So in our work, you know, we will it's not like you can push the river. I use a lot of water metaphors, you'll hear. But you can't push the river. You can, you don't want to go with the flow where you're out of control, right? You have to have some control and you have to run your business. You have to run your publishing. But there's a flow to things, and I'm grateful that we have that opportunity at Waub Ajijaak Press and Foundation. It would only make sense with Ajijaak, right?
I was nodding and then realized my video was off. um, so I was really struck. There was an article in Publishers Weekly, I think last week, that interviewed a bunch of people from the Black publishing world. And one of the writers I really admire of children's books is Carol Boston Weatherford. And she was saying that knowing your history is generational wealth. And that really struck me because that feels so resonant to I'm gay, and for me, being a member of the queer community, I do a lot of books on queer history for kids, and I think a lot about that. Really resonated for me, and I think that there's a parallel as well to the work that you all are doing in terms of like knowing your history is generational wealth, and if we can pass that knowledge on, our future generations will be better off. And I was thinking about Wiley, you were talking about, the nonfiction focus, and I was thinking about like, how did you find the right people to be editors and to sort of like be the people that would vet the information coming in? You can't personally be an expert in every aspect of your community's, history. So like, did you like, I'm wondering how you set about creating the structure of like, okay, this is going to be the editorial team for this book, but maybe this book needs a different editorial team.
Well, I mean, that's a tough question, Lee, but you end up having to be experts. But if we don't have that expert, we find that expert. So we're fortunately with the Chickasaw Nation. I'm part of a umbrella called Culture and Humanities, which includes the Chickasaw Cultural Center. It includes our Chickasaw Language Department. It includes anthropologists, archaeologists, people that are in the field doing the research. So I have a whole lot of people we can access when we need them. But I've been fortunate enough with all our in-house authors, they have been experts. That's partly why they've been on staff, is that they have either currently or previously dedicated a good chunk of their life towards Chickasaw history and culture. And so we've had about 4 in-house authors since 2006, all of which have been Chickasaw and who have, had background in various, prior to coming on as an author, but various areas that would directly influence and help them write about Chickasaw history and culture, which is what we strive to do, is, write from our perspective. So, but it's a challenge, and we're in rural Oklahoma. We're in Ada, Oklahoma, which is, 2 hours north of Dallas, hour and a half from Oklahoma City. And so having staff in our community and being staffed with experts, it is a challenge. We do pretty well at it, and the Chickasaw Nation currently employs 14,500 people, primarily in Oklahoma, but also outside of Oklahoma. There's other areas that the Chickasaw Nation is, so that they are well organized, and we have really good recruiters and things like that help us. So.
I'm thinking about like there's being a publisher, there must be a mix of like some things you're pulling, right? You're getting submissions and you're like, yes, this one really resonates and this one really speaks. And then there's also sort of like a push happening, like you have to reach out. And maybe you're requesting somebody that is an expert. Hey, we really would love a book on your expertise.
Yes,
Cecelia, do
you're
you, sorry,
exactly right. There is a lot of networking community. There's acquisition, but there's idea acquisition, like where you have an idea and then you're actually, I mean, sometimes the idea comes first, and then you're trying to find that author and pitch that idea to them. Would you, because we on nonfiction side we take proposals. On fiction and children's books, we take submissions based on complete manuscripts. But on the nonfiction side, we will take a proposal, which is unique. But when you're, so they don't even have to have written it yet. I mean, ideally, we want like a sample chapter and a proposal, but I mean, basically a synopsis, but we'll take proposal because, a lot of times, especially an academic or somebody that's going to spend the next 2 or 3 years researching and writing something, to have a commitment from a publisher before you even started is a big deal. And then a lot of times you hear about somebody's thesis or somebody's thing that would you adapt that into a book? So there is a lot of networking and chasing down things to get content.
Cecilia, do you also find that in terms of the flow you were talking about, that there's a combination of pushing and pulling to be a publisher?
Yes, I would definitely say so. Um, I think, with my background in, having led a statewide coalition, and then you have the community outreach element of here's a community partner, here's a speaker we want for a conference, for an event. I have that experience. And sometimes people are so enthusiastic about the work, and then they have their lives and they're busy and things come up. We all have things come up, right? So things out of our control. And so sometimes it's like you want to have something done, you want to have a book published by a certain time, but maybe there's an adjustment. And, I think having a timeline, but also not being so strict about things can allow for that flexibility. Um, so, and in the long run, and it can be a good thing, as I found that it gives time to make the book look even better.
I was curious, are either of your publishing programs using back matter to promote other books in your backlist? It's something I've seen. Something I've seen some people do in the world of sort of author publishers. But I was thinking, Wiley, you were saying that sometimes, um, people find out about what you're doing and then they get excited, and that drives sales of the backlist. And I'm wondering, how are you getting the word out about your backlist titles?
Well, I mean, that's a challenge. We don't really, in that sense, like comparable titles. I mean, obviously, if it's an author's second, third, or I mean, we do have some second, third, and fourth books from certain individuals, and then obviously, if I think some of that's easier in the fiction and children's, it depends on nonfiction whether that works, but uh, we obviously we market to our people, Chickasaw people, and we have lots of outlets that we can reach them through social media, or the Chickasaw Nation has their own newspaper that we can promote and get publicity, um, free publicity through our own paper to kind of spread the word. And there's lots of Chickasaw Nation in-person events. Now that, obviously the in-person events targets are what we call our inbound citizens, the Chickasaw citizens that are living in our Oklahoma territory. But there's lots of citizens that live all over the United States and the globe. So I think it's a challenge to reach any of your audience. I think knowing your audience is a good start of who, because obviously we'll focus on those specifically at first, because we know that they already will have an interest. We're starting with leaning pole, and we're getting in. We have a handful of fiction. We have over a dozen different children's books, and there's a lot of our books that appeal to anyone. And so those are the ones that I feel like kind of get us in the door. Even, and I would say even in the market of a bookstore, they're like, they want those forward facing, sometimes titles that are the easy grab, and then they're like, oh man, I really like that, what else do you have? And sometimes that opens the door to our nonfiction biography or things like that maybe initially we got blocked, so we also, Lee, we're a little bit unique, and don't let my planning of years in advance say that we're rigid either, because the reason why we have so many ahead is because we actually release at the same time every year, which is a challenge in itself. But we constantly have to adjust as well, and that's why we work so far in advance, because I have to, we plan to see what we can have ready that year, and so we're constantly sliding in one, removing one, pushing another one in, and kind of doing this back and forth of what we think can be ready. And then another thing, the biggest challenge for us lately, especially since COVID and everybody's dealing with this, is we have really high quality. Our books are really high quality, and we actually keep quite a bit of inventory on hand. But the prices of everything is going up, and how we want to be competitive in the market, but still have affordable books. And so we started years ago that we have a two pricing structure. So we have what we call, everybody's used to, list price, but we actually discount our own price direct to consumer. And usually that price is actually cheaper than any of the big wholesalers would offer it. And we still make decent money, but we're doing that to make our books affordable to our people, because that's primarily what we're worried about, is that if it's a coffee table book and it's leather bound and it's beautiful, like we have an atlas, it's a book of maps that tells the Chickasaw story through the history of maps. If we try to sell that book in the $60, $70, $80 range, we're pricing ourselves out. So we discounted our price to our people is 40, but we still have that list price that gets us that wholesale opportunity, and then we still have a discounted price. So it's almost like a permanent sale. So and we've been doing that for years, and it works pretty well for us.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing. I'm wondering about the idea, since we were talking about backlist, the idea of a title being evergreen, like something that isn't a fad, but is something that you can imagine will still be selling in 10 years, or will still have audience in the future. Cecelia, is that one of the criteria you think of when you're deciding on a project?
Well, definitely, I would say how this can be going on into the next, 7 generations. So when Waub Ajijaak, I don't imagine that that it's going to be continuing, because I don't have any children. So there's, how would it continue? So after this is no longer in existence, the books will be out there in the world. So that's the impact we make, and that's kind of a cultural value that we share, is how can we be, my mother always says, how can we contribute our own verse to the world? And so that is what we do. There's that part, and it's doing your part. So the books are going to be out there, and in 2195, I hope someone says, look, it's Ajijaak, or it's Little Bear, Little Berry, or the new book that comes out, the new books that come out in the future. And that they're in, I have to speak of being in the generations, being Generation X and growing up with books and in the value of reading. And so it's also like, when we send books, when we're producing books, it's that value of a book and what it means. It's not just, look, I bought a book. It's going into someone's hands. It's going into someone's home. They can have reading time. They can read it 10 times a week if they want. But that's how we contribute, and It's us putting that one pebble in the lake, and there goes the ripples.
Awesome. Wiley, you've been doing a lot of work. I know this because I'm on the IBPA DEI committee with you, and I know that you've really been leading the charge on something to do BISAC codes. I think give us a general explanation and then share a little bit about the work that you have been doing, and Lauren Stewart from BookNet Canada has been helping with on getting the BISAC codes to be better. Please.
Sure. So we could spend a whole session on this, but so Lauren and I met through the BISAC committee, and she had already started this work on in Canada prior to me kind of jumping in, and then we ended up creating a working group and collaborating to basically infuse Indigenous worldviews into the BISAC subject classification system. So all books have BISAC codes. They're subject codes that are used primarily for categorizing books online in media and bookstores. And so through about a 2-year work with Lauren, and we partnered with a bunch of other individuals and authors and publishers that had an interest in helping us create and modify codes. We went from about 25 codes to I think it was the 2023 edition, 134 new codes for Indigenous books. And so across all categories, there were 17 new codes for fiction subject headings. We spent a lot of time on the history side. That was one of the longest discussions that we had. And so what we found, what Lauren and I discovered, kind of like for history, it was limited to just one code prior to 2023, and it was History, Indigenous Peoples of the Americas. And so if you wanted any other granularity for history, you could use History United States 19th century, or History United States Civil War period 1850 to 1877. But those are all problematic from an Indigenous worldview because they're solely from a colonial perspective. And so we were able, through the committee work and all the feedback, Lauren and I were able to get approved some new codes for history. And I'll just read a few of those real quick. There's History, Indigenous Creations and Origins. There's History, Indigenous Migration. There's History, Indigenous Archaeological Stages and Interpretations of Oral History. There's History, Indigenous Contact, European Invasion and Exploration. There's History, Indigenous Colonial History and Interactions with Nations, Tribes, Bands, and Communities. And then there's History, Indigenous Modern. So basically all these new codes just increase granularity. They help discoverability. And it was much needed. The work's not done. There's still a lot of BISAC work that is ongoing, not only just for Indigenous books, but across lots of other subject areas that are in desperate need of either more codes or basically revisions.
And just to clarify, BISAC codes define the subject matter of a book, and they're part of the sort of metadata that travels with a book and helps the book be discovered. So they become really important for your book to be surfaced. And the idea is that you ideally want it to be pretty specific to your book. So that's amazing, Wiley. And is there a book that you weren't able to sort of get the right BISAC code for that now you can with the new 134 codes?
Well, I mean, especially when, there was just one fiction. So like, you have in historical fiction, Indigenous romance, you're like able to actually narrow down where if a bookstore is looking for a specific subject to fit along with the other books of interest, that they have a way to find your title. Because if you think about it, lumping yourself into everything fiction, unless your book description, which even then, I mean, the internet is helping, but BISAC right now is the system that is in place for North America. And no system is perfect. So like I said, the work's still ongoing, but yes, we recoded our entire catalog. And the challenge that Lauren and I found is that the perspective from Canada and the United States is different. And so that was the challenge, because there are some codes that say Native American, or and that just doesn't work for Canada at all. And so that's some of the issue. And I mean, we didn't, it's not perfect. What we did is not perfect, but it's better. So
Better is good.
yeah.
And truly, you've been doing a ton of work on that as a volunteer through IBPA. So thank you for that work, and Lauren, thank you as well. Um, I want to open it up for any questions from the people attending live, and I am. Oh, you have a nice message from Janine in the chat. I found that the new BISAC codes let me narrow down my Indigenous science fiction fantasy titles. Um, and I don't want to, I'm going to mispronounce it. I apologize. Yakoke Fena Hoke to Wiley and his team for this.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I'm happy to hear some real time use of those, because I mean, Lauren and I have heard a little bit, but yeah, it's always really, I appreciate the comment.
That's amazing, Janine. Thank you for telling us. That makes it like, oh, all that work. So I was hoping that we could, in an open way, is there anything else that you really wanted to share for the people watching this recording or the people attending live, if they're like thinking about publishing something for their community? Is there something that you haven't gotten a chance to say yet, Cecelia?
Actually, last year I attended the Native Americans in Philanthropy conference in Minneapolis, and it was such an interesting experience because I had a feeling to go to this one panel discussion, and I met a relative who is actually a direct descendant of Ogama Waub Ajijaak. So, and then I found out her name is Baswewe, which is in the language is the how the crane sound travels. It's in our language, Baswewe means echo maker. So I think I'm sharing this as like, oh, and then there was another thing that occurred. I ran into the former tribal chairman of the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe, and he kept saying to me, "You have to go to the island." Well, I wasn't able to go to the island last year, which is Madeline Island, and it's really important for the Ojibwe people. And so I will get to the island hopefully this year, but again, we can't push the river, right? So I'm mentioning this because as what I am so grateful for every day is that this process, running this organization, is not necessarily like you can set a timeline, you can set structure, which you should. You should always have the business um, points in place to keep the wheels turning. But there's also going to be things like that occur that kind of show you, look, there's these connections around the organization or around the programs that you run or the books that you publish or the books you will publish. And so for us, it's being open to those possibilities because they're out there. And I think especially because of the different teachings in different Native communities and nations, um, we're open to that process. It's cultural. And you could say it's almost magical, but it's really cultural because you're going to run into relations. And I didn't know that going to that conference in Minneapolis that I would run into people that were a part of the organization. So that is another thing. It's like, yes, I'm the founder and executive director, but there's so many other people behind this that are here and not here with us. So our culture too is that the ancestors are always with you. So there's no, there is another side, but for us, it's right here too. They're always with you. So that's another thing is like, I think it's the beauty of the organization and the publishing is it's really vast. And I'll end with that.
Lovely, thank you. Wiley?
I would just say that we need more people writing and publishing in this space. And I just, starting with your local community and your the people in your community is a good place to start. And it doesn't have to be, there's different paths. And so there's no right path, whether that's whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a full business. I think my advice is to just do what you think you can. And so starting out small is okay. There's publishing in an ebook format or doing print on demand models is fine. There's we started out primarily just direct to consumer. I mean, we didn't even have a website. It was mainly just setting up tables and selling books in the early years, and that's okay. I think it's something we've had to grow into, and funding is scary. There are a lot of federal grants that are available that can help. We published books twice through the National Park Service grants, and they've been really good to work with. And we've published titles through the National Park Service. So there's lots of opportunities. IBPA has had a lot of good advice on this. They have a lot of connections, even with Kickstarter. A lot of people have had success with Kickstarter, and that's a good place for new authors and publishers to find their audience as well. And so I just want to charge people to tell their story, own their history, and not be scared to do something, because that's been my concern. Is there's a lot of interest, but it's like taking that first step to do something, and I think that's important. And I would charge and welcome anybody to do so. And I think Cecelia would say the same thing, that I'd happy to help and talk to anybody that needs help. So.
That was great. Thank you. I just have one more idea that we might, one more question, and then we'll stop the recording. Wiley, you started off and you said publishing is hard, and yeah, publishing is hard. We definitely see that, but there are also moments of remarkable kind of joy and reward. And I'm wondering if for each of you, there was a particular moment that you could share that felt like resonant, that might inspire us.
That's a tough one. There's been lots of moments. I mean, the work is rewarding. It's meaningful. It's lasting. I mean, for me, it's like it's in the core of like who I am, as far as like every book matters, every story needs to be told. There's so many elders and friends that I have met. I was lucky in my early years of working for the Chickasaw Nation. I did not grow up in Oklahoma, so I lived in 10 other states, but I relocated. This is where my grandparents were, my Chickasaw family is from. And so when I first started with Chickasaw Nation, I met a man named Kennedy Brown, who has passed away now. And I did not know it at the time, but he was a lieutenant governor. So we have governor and lieutenant governor, but he's a former lieutenant governor in the 80s. And I didn't know it because I just didn't at that time know the history, but he treated me like a friend from the get-go. And he was always asking me what I was doing. And I ended up becoming really good friends with him. And his wife would call me every year, and I would hand deliver the books, and I would go take the books, and I would sit in the living room and talk to her and her family. And so, like, those are the things that make it worth it, you know. So I'm gonna get emotional about it, but it's definitely one of those things that you know, makes it all worth it and makes you feel good inside. And so yeah, I did that for years. They're both passed away now, and they're wonderful people. So
Yes, like Wiley, there's a lot. And for me, even though I'm a very family and community oriented person. So when I was a kid, there was something really impactful where we had camp, okay, this was the 90s. So we had camcorders, you remember? And I remember watching the camcorder later for my dad. He couldn't read his birthday card. And so my dad went through substandard school district, talk about marginalization in an urban school district in Michigan. And it always pained me that the system had failed so many of our people and still does. And I always loved to read. So I was raised in a home where reading was valued. And years years later, you know, the passion, it's not just about literacy. It's not just feeling as a child watching that video and seeing my dad. That's not that's not his fault. It was the fault of the system. So the literacy component is very touching because you're getting books into, you know, the kids' hands. You're getting books into, you know, learners of all ages, and that's what we're about. So, you know, I know that's not an isolated story, and to be a master's educated, you know, person that has two businesses, I used to have three, and it's just these accomplishments are nice, but it's more about what changes can we make in the community, you know, and if you were to look at a pie chart, that literacy component is a part of it, but it's also the language revitalization. Going back, my grandfather was fluent in Anishinaabe language when he moved from the reservation to Detroit for work in the 50s, which a lot of people did. And I know it wasn't the forced relocation. So that's always been a question of mine. There was a lot of, in the Midwest, there was a lot of forced relocation to Chicago and Milwaukee and Minneapolis, but not at Detroit, of course, but not, I don't think as much. But yes, and then I love to get just even when people say, "Oh, your book, your books," and I'm like, "What?" So sometimes I'm like, the compliments, I don't take them in because I'm so focused, and I know Wiley understands this. I'm so focused on the work and the business, and like I f- I can't take in the compliment, but the compliment can change your day. It like changes your day, and it may be something like 2 words, 3 words, you know. So yeah, and I don't know, and that's the beauty of it. Like I said, it's so vast. You don't know the impact, and you also don't know the positive things that are coming as a result of the books. So, yeah, that's what I can share.
So make ripples, right?
Yes, yes.
Well, Cecelia, Wiley, thank you so much for everyone watching. We really appreciate your tuning in. Please reach out if IBPA can be helpful to you on your creating your publishing program. And we really appreciate your being here.